is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Cristina Marin. So part of our intention with the theme of this symposium is not only to reveal and examine the many borders and walls among us and through us, but also to actively imagine a way forward that might break down, erase, and move through those walls. And for centuries, one of the ways that people have tried to make sense of this world and to imagine new possibilities is through art, as we were just talking about with the J. Paul Taylor exhibit, and through drama. And so Dr. Marin's specialty is in an area of drama that is all about that. So Dr. Cristina Marin is the program director of theater and film at Phoenix College. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Theater with a concentration in acting and directing from Northwestern University, and a PhD in theater with a concentration in theater for youth from Arizona State University. She's an international practitioner of theater of the oppressed techniques in educational settings, including schools, leadership programs, and community youth work organizations. Her work has taken her to Singapore, Jamaica, Ireland, Mexico, Ecuador, Colombia, Turkey, and South Africa, as well as across the United States. She has presented workshops and papers at the annual meetings of Pedagogy and Theater of the Oppressed, the Association for Theater in Higher Education, the American Educational Research Association, the International Drama in Education Research Institute, and the United States Hispanic Leadership Institute, among others. Most recently, she edited Palabras del Cielo, an exploration of Latino theater for young audiences with Jose Casas through Dramatic Publishing. So welcome, Cristina. Thank you so much for being here today.
She must be really tired, that lady. She sounds like she does way too much. I feel bad for her. But I feel very excited for her that she was invited to come to the J. Paul Taylor Symposium. She is a really lucky gal. I have spent the week in Las Cruces, and I have one thing to say. Watch out for the first graders of this community, because I had the pleasure of working with 3 first-grade classes at Highland Elementary School, and they would knock your socks off. They knocked my socks off to the tune of, I couldn't even find the same socks today. They really just were incredible. And we did do some work very similar to this kind of work that I've been doing in interdisciplinary and gender and sexuality studies classes here in the theater program here. But we've never had that much time until last night. We had a community workshop, and we had some incredible people come out. Some of them are here in this room, and I'm going to rely on them to talk a little bit about the experience. And we decided when Larissa and I talked about this opportunity to come, there was talk about a whole bunch of other stuff, and then we landed on this. And as I explained it, Larissa was just like, let me talk to the committee, let's see if this is going to work. So this branch of what is known as the Theater of the Oppressed, developed by Augusto Boal from Brazil, based really in the pedagogy of Paulo Freire, also Brazilian educationalist, really examines our notions of literacy. And how do we read the word, first of all, right? How do you read what it says up there? Applied drama workshop and talk. Right? What does literacy mean to us? When I say the word literacy, what comes to your mind? Books.
Vocabulary.
Vocabulary.
Reading. Home knowledge.
Knowledge. Home knowledge. A literacy of the word is based in language, right? Now if I say, what about a literacy of the world? How do we read the world in which we live? How do we read it? What texts do we use, and what texts are we exposed to? Newspaper, there you go, there's one. Yeah. But what else? How else do we do? Images, photographs.
Action.
The internet, actions that people take, absolutely. What else?
Body language.
Huh?
Body language.
Body language, gesture, facial expression. In the collaborative theater class, we talked about that idea that, you know when you're at a gathering of people, maybe this is very true for the Latinx community, you go to a carne asada and you say hello to everyone, you kiss everyone on person. And they don't talk to you until Christmas. Because no me saludaste, pues, y entonces se enojan, and then it's just all over, right? And then you're like, well, you were in the kitchen, and I was outside, and I didn't know where you were. They won't give you a present, that's it. So this idea of we read the world through communication, intercommunication, small group communication, right? This is what all of our studies in communication are all about. In this talk workshop, and I feel like it's such an interesting space. Last night we had a readers' theater where we were all on the same level, which is why I don't do podiums, mostly because I would also disappear behind that podium. And need like the big box to get up on the podium, right? But the idea is not for me to necessarily just talk. But of course, you know, it's a symposium, so you need some kind of like PowerPoint, right? Okay, get it, PowerPoint. So what I'm about to share with you are the techniques that I was introduced to when I was a graduate student and I started studying Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed. I read the book, Theater of the Oppressed, and on page 143 in the English translation, I found a list. And the list was a simple list of, at that point, 10 techniques. I'll tell you about 12. And each one of them only had one sentence to them. And I just kept thinking, like, there's so much written about invisible theater, and there's so much written about image theater and forum theater, all these other kinds of theater. This newspaper theater only gets one page. Finally, years later, I was introduced to a book called Legislative Theater. And Augusto Boal had unwittingly, some of his theater compatriots said to him, you know, we really should show as artists our support for the Green Party here in Brazil. We should run a candidate. And he was like, oh yeah, who do you think? And they're like, you. And he's like, I'm not running for government, that's a silly idea. And they said, oh, well, we don't expect you to win. And he's like, oh, okay, so you want me to run for government and then we'll lose, so I don't actually have to do anything, but it's just to make a statement. And I'm like, yes. Guess what?
You won.
He did. 13 laws were passed into, 13 bills, I should say. I remember Schoolhouse Rock. Bills were passed into laws. Based on the forum theater work that they did in communities around Brazil while he was vereador in Brazil. So these techniques are written about in a later section of his book, Legislative Theater, and they were writings from his earlier period of exile from Brazil. And yeah, imagine doing theater so dangerous, you get exiled from your country. This is the kind of theater I like doing.
Yeah, right.
I actually had the opportunity to introduce some students from all over Colombia, which is where my heritage is from. My father was from Medellin, Colombia. And I brought a symposium there. They had the 8th annual symposium on theater. And we were doing Theater of the Oppressed, and I thought to myself, how is it that all of these students don't know about Theater of the Oppressed when Brazil is right next door? And when I asked that question, they were like, oh yeah, good idea. Let's do the theater that the guy who got exiled did. And let's see how well that goes over in Colombia. You know, that wasn't something that our teachers have ever discussed with us. So, you know, great opportunities. And the opportunity to bring these techniques and these tools here. And I do believe that they're artistic techniques that can be used in schools and very much in like a project-based learning kind of way, giving the tools of education over to our students. There is a whole set of educational tools called drama in education. But then there's also this whole set of tools, so that's DIE, we call it DIE. There's also NIE. I've learned about this over the past few years, newspaper in education. So this really ties both of these things together. So these techniques are ways of taking text, and it doesn't even have to be just newspapers, right? We discussed last night that the text that we use to do these techniques can be songs, the lyrics of songs. They can be artwork, visual artwork. You can take different poetry and all different kinds of text. You can take a menu from a restaurant and create newspaper theater based on any kind of text. Okay, are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so a simple reading. What is it that when you do read an actual newspaper, you notice? How is a newspaper laid out to catch your attention? Headlines, right? Headlines. So headlines are printed in a font that's much bigger, and you're sitting on a New York City subway and someone's like, half a car away, they turn their head, they can see what is the headline of the front page, right? And so and it influences the way that you read the article. Yeah? What else? The way the news is shown, the way it's all laid out, right? If you get to the end of an article and it says continued on page like B12, and you're like, oh my God, no, I don't have time, right? I can't finish the article because there's like 6 more pages of the article, right? So the way it's laid out in the newspaper affects how we read it. A simple read, the news item is read without comment or commentary, but it's detached from the context of the newspaper, and the audience is therefore not influenced by such biases as the position of the story. I once read I was so excited. I was living in New York teaching at NYU, and there was supposedly an article about Las Mujeres de Juárez in the newspaper, in the small local newspaper. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible, because I've been working on plays about Las Mujeres de Juárez. The article was this big. The article in its entirety, and 60% of that space was a picture of pink crosses. There were 4 lines of text to the article, and my heart broke. The newspaper had chosen to relegate this important information somewhere in the back of the newspaper. So instead of actually physically reading it, a simple read is a performance of the text or a portion of the text so that it is not influenced by the owners of the media. Does that make sense? Now, one of the things about these techniques also is they're not mutually exclusive. You're supposed to combine them and layer them and also add your own flavor to them. Can we advance to the next slide, please? A complementary reading. How often do we have the feeling that we read a piece of news and it's about people, but it feels very clinical? It doesn't feel like there are human beings in the stories that we're reading about, right? We might as well be dissecting guinea pigs in a lab. Right? Zoe shared with us in the class the other day, she read a story in a newspaper, an article in a newspaper about DACA and dreamers, but that it was so clinical. So a complementary read is meant to, the news item is read, but information generally omitted by the newspapers is added to give a more complete version of the story. The additional information can be sourced from anywhere. Research, other newspapers, which then we go into cross-reading. But the idea is that we're using other information to fill in what is omitted by the media, right? The story that we know to be behind the story. Next slide. Cross-reading. 2 either contradictory or linked stories are read in cross-alternating form to shed new light on each story, adding deeper explanation or providing a new dimension. One of the things is, too, if we read about this wall and this border from the perspective of US media, and we intersplice Mexican media and newspapers, what does that look like in performance? What does that look like as an arts installation or an exhibit? How do those 2 things interface? Right? Professor Voisin shared that she had I think she might have said that for a second. Oh, okay. Talking about a German exchange student who she had living with her, got here and said, oh, wait, he's serious about this? We thought it was just a myth, that this really wasn't something that your country was serious about putting up a wall. That's weird. And what is the perception from outside? So not just about looking at 2 stories from 2 US American papers, but looking at different countries' perspectives of our situation, or also layering ours into other walls that are up around the world, right? Next, does anyone have questions so far? A rhythmical reading. Reading the newspaper to a rhythm with music behind it, underneath it, using the body. The news is read or sung with a rhythm as a musical commentary, for example, to samba, tango, Gregorian chant. It is filtered through the connotations of this rhythm, right? How can rhythms from both sides of this border or this wall, and again, not just this border or this wall, borders and walls? How do we express ourselves artistically? Next, parallel action. So we read the newspaper item just like we were reading it in a simple reading, but then we have some people acting out the human story right next to it. What is in the newspaper? What are we talking about? What are we reading about? To show either the context in which the reported event really occurred or to make commentary on it. To not necessarily, right? So we read the article about the border wall and then have a performance of 10 to 15 people who are climbing over each other just to get on the other side of each other. Some kind of physical, abstract kind of idea, right? Parallel action being performed while the item is being read. Next. And that is also something that if we took the news article and we did improvisation around the story that's being told, right? So it's not necessarily just enacting what's happening inside of the story, but an improvisation about the context, an improvisation about the families who are torn apart by this wall, improvisation about stories of, I was visiting Brigham Young University last year, and one of the professors shared with me that her son came home, and he said, some of my friends at school say that if this guy gets elected president, they're going to have to go back somewhere. And she said, that could be true. He said, I will have no friends left if he gets elected president. If we have an improvisation of that scene next to a story from the newspaper about this border wall, how do human lives, improvisations using the theater about human lives affected by this, tell the story that's left out of the newspaper? Historical reading. This happens to be one of my favorites. The news item is read together with facts or scenes that show the same event in other historical moments or other countries or social systems. Last night, Stephen said in the workshop, history repeats itself. If we don't learn from history, what happens? How many walls have there been on this planet? How many walls have come tumbling down? How many walls do we think we need to create? And if we were able to take the article about dreamers in this country today and juxtapose them historically against Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and take testimonials from Ellis Island about people who dreamed of a better world somewhere far from persecution or poverty, who is a dreamer? Throughout our history, who have been the dreamers? And how can we historically reflect on that through this artistic kind of lens? Next, a reinforced reading. So the news item is read or sung with the aid or accompaniment of reinforcing materials such as audio, visuals, jingles, advertising, or publicity materials. My idea for our newspaper theater installation is that we have one of those, thermometers, right? A digital thermometer. Last night, was it Loretta that shared an article about how this wall originally started at somewhere like $12 million, the cost of the wall. And then it went up a little bit. And it creeped, right? Like a fundraising event for the Girl Scouts. Like, how many cookies have they sold, right? How much money is this going to cost? Whoever's going to pay for it, right, sir? And it's about kind of making a commentary on what the news is actually saying. Next. The concretion of the abstract. People often get upset when I describe this part of our installation. It's meant to upset you. If we take a bunch of puppets of E.T. and we put sombreros and ponchos on them and then cover them up with orange jumpsuits, right, from the prison industrial complex, and we parade around a bunch of illegal aliens, what does that word mean? Commentary through an abstract idea to show what the concrete fact is that for, and I don't But I know when I was teaching in Boston, the New York Times insisted that they were going to continue using the term because it's just what had always been used. And some of my graduate students at Emerson couldn't understand why I cared so much about it, and why these two innocuous words were so hard for me to accept. Illegal didn't mean anything, and alien didn't mean anything alone. And the lesson I had to basically unpack with her was, so Meg, do you like the word nigger? No, of course not. Anyone ever called you that? No, but there are people with a history who've been hurt by that word. Oh, okay. Anyone ever call you a faggot? No, Christina. Well, why are you so upset by the word then? Because people have been hurt by it. There's a history. I said, well, Meg, I'm here to teach you a new history. There are people who are hurt by these words, and you need to open up that idea that language can be used as a weapon, but it can also be used as a tool to build very important artistic representations of how we take the abstract to basically represent what the news says. Revealing on stage what the news often hides or masks beneath cliches, overused terms, or matter-of-fact reporting. Concepts such as torture, hunger, unemployment are shown concretely, graphic imagery, real or symbolic, right? E.T. Is used to reclaim the emotional impact of abstracted concepts. A wall is just a wall, is just a wall, is just a wall. Yes, next. Text out of context. So the news item is presented out of the context in which it was published. For example, an actor portraying the prime minister of a country delivers a speech about austerity while devouring a huge dinner. Right? The truth behind the words is demystified. For example, the prime minister wants austerity for the people, just not themselves. Right? So this idea of performing something that has nothing to do with what the news article is actually talking about, or what the interview is talking about, or anything, but we take it out of context. Next. Insertion into the actual context, the broadening the scope of the news story in order to place it in its actual context, uncovering the reality behind the sensational details of the news's focus. Creating a scene about war on an actual battlefield, so to speak, when talking about war. Right? Next. Okay, so this was a technique that's called the lost technique, and it appears in a review that was done in 1971, and it's basically a field interview. So one of the characters from the news might be interviewed on stage like an athlete might be interviewed during halftime of a game. So, as I've been doing this work over the last, 20 years, probably? No, 18 years. I've brought, and one of the things that Mr. Bois always said was, take my work and run with it. Don't just let it be static. It's not a formula. If you think of other ways. I can think of no better way to own the news of today than to tell young people, read this newspaper article and then write a tweet. How do you distill this down into this concept of, this is what I would tweet to tell people what this, right? Because we need to take back the context of social media, because it seems to be the way that our government is, I don't even know what. So strange. I feel like I'm living the upside down. I really do. Right? Stranger Things, it's just not reality right now. So the next slide is going to ask you a question. Next slide. Other ideas. Are there any ideas you have that could be like, oh, well, what if you did this? Right? A rap battle about news issues would actually be rhythmical reading. Dude, that wasn't really a dab. Sorry. Social media-based ideas, tweets, photo essays. What else? Does anyone have any ideas about how you could maybe own the news or what's happening in current events based on your experience, based on articles that you've read, thoughts that you might have? I also want to be really careful with time, because I know we don't have a lot of time. What I'm really, oh yes, go ahead.
Paint a mural.
A mural, that would be a brilliant idea. Really getting a community really reading through the articles, talking about them, and then really expressing through visual art a full mural of the articles. Yeah?
Poetry.
Absolutely. Poetry is one of the most important expressions that we use artistically. Absolutely. Right? Distill an entire State of the Union address into a haiku. You know you're all tempted to do it right now.
Performance art or guerrilla theater.
Absolutely. Right? Street art, going out, doing performance-based work anywhere. Surveillance camera theater is a very interesting kind of pop-up guerrilla theater that goes into like different places where they know surveillance cameras are, and they just put on plays right there because they know that there's an audience. Yep. I'm going to ask people who were there last night, people who are in the classes, anything that you've taken away from the work that we've done, ideas that sort of came up for you. Does anyone want to share anything from the past few days? You're like, yeah.
Emily and I are currently working on something, a project on the Vice Theater.
And this is?
My name is Yamilex.
And
I'm a theater major. And we are thinking about the completion of the abstract.
concretion of the
The
abstract.
concretion of the abstract. We're working on a very like dark piece. We want to go, we want our audience to feel in discomfort.
Wait, is this the one that's about assured mutual destruction? Is that the one we were talking about?
Is it? Yes. Okay, yeah, you talk. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
So we want our audience to like feel this thing about what would happen if a nuclear war were actually to happen. And how will we live and what will we do? And I don't know, I feel like I have more ideas now than I had before. And I feel like I can share with our director what we learned in the class and what we refreshed here in newspaper theater. We can use techniques to like generate content.
And to unpack and explore all of that content. Absolutely.
Can everybody hear? Yes, okay, great.
They're your theater students.
I
They project
know.
their voices.
I know.
Absolutely. Yes. Hey, hi.
Something for me this week, thinking about this, one, it's sort of like a percolating thing just to experience and to think about, but I often spend so much time thinking in ideas and like literally. For me, it's been really neat to try to put visuals and like engage the other senses. And in our workshop on Monday, I think what struck me the most was how a simple body posture can convey so much and distill an entire idea into just one thing that your body is experiencing, and then other people can see that and feel that in their own bodies, and really just like embodying a story. So that was powerful for me.
So much of this work is based in what in Spanish we call expresión corporeal, or corporeal existence of concepts. So instead of thinking about, when I told first graders, get into a big circle, turn your back to the middle of the circle, and then I'm going to say a word, and when I count to 3, you only have 3 seconds to think about it. Don't think about it with your mind, think about it with your body. You're going to turn around and put it on your body, and I said tree, 1, 2, 3, and we had elms, and oaks, and fir trees, and the beauty of 6-year-olds embodying ice cream. I know it is breathtaking. Because we had cones, and we had people having like flaming freeze with their ice cream, and we had someone who dropped their ice cream. It was so sad. But the idea of putting it on your body instead of continually thinking about it. And so much of this is about, so much of the media is represented in words. And yet we read and we have a literacy of the world that is different than language. I have done workshops, and so living in Arizona, having been a New Yorker all my life, we did a workshop with a group called Hands Across the Border. 8th graders from Mexico, 8th graders from Arizona. same language, but not all of them, corporeally, they were able to create image theater about the border. And it's fascinating because both sides, I asked them, create an image with people from just your country, and then your country, and then we're going to create images that basically cross borders. And in the images, they had to create an image of the United States and the image of Mexico in each of their two separate groups. It was amazing how both sides really represented the U.S. through like cold hard cash. It was like all about money, and I was like, wow, you guys really do understand capitalism. Like, it's great. That's great. But then when they got together, there was such an expression of a desire to see a binational understanding and communication that I've not seen in adults, right? And those young people are now adults, right? That was a while ago. It's back when I was in grad school. That's 12 years ago. Those 8th graders are all adults now. And I wonder where they are and what they think. And if that work together, right? Though it wasn't through verbal language, a lot of it was definitely corporeal. Do they have a different understanding of the world that they live in? And are they making it a different place? Do people have questions? I would like nothing better than for all of us to get up on stage and play some theater games and do some newspaper theater. We have King Semi-Noodles. Not happy. Questions? Yes?
How do you deal with trauma in the body in theater? So it triggers something within you, like water crossing experiences or other triggering experiences that are traumatic, and you see it and you may not even know it.
Yes.
So how do you work through that?
So I think one of the most important things and I've worked with drama teachers and educators who are using theater in the classroom across disciplines and across curriculum. One of the most important things that I think we try to impart onto teachers is to make sure they understand that they may have the tools for theater, but they don't have the tools for psychoanalysis. And they don't necessarily have tools to deal with all of the things that may be triggered. When I was teaching at Emerson, I had a student share that when she was in the 8th grade living, I think in Pennsylvania, her 8th grade teacher thought it would be a really good idea to get a bunch of adults from the school and take the 8th graders out for a field trip where they literally took them out into a field. And I'm not saying field trip to like a museum. They took them out into a field, they had them lay down, they started to set off guns and use like sticks and said, now you need to cross through the Underground Railroad and get north. Now that is negligent use of theater education. It is like going into it to trigger young people, right? But we can't take for granted that some of the work that we're doing about borders and walls is absolutely going to be triggering, right? I don't set out to do any damage. Do no harm is, a very important part of education. But to know at all times who your resources and allies are to provide those kinds of, provide that kind of assistance, to know the counselors of the school that you're working to, I don't go into schools and just sort of like, show up and be like, hey, I'm gonna do drama with all of you. There's definitely connections that I have right here. The WIGS program is who I worked through with these 3 first grade teachers. But I think it's a really important question because when you are physicalizing so much, right, and you're not necessarily also, one of the things is we do pair it with praxis, right? We are talking about the experiences and unpacking these ideas and then having this experience theoretically sort of, there's a time to talk about it. The forum part of it is the time to talk about it. But the artwork happens, a lot of the games that we play, a lot of the things that we do happen in silence. So that we're not, la palabra nos engaña. Muchas veces, we're betrayed by words. Words mean something different to the person who hears them than what we're meaning to say. So I think it's an important question. And I don't necessarily have like a concrete answer other than knowing who your allies are that have those, who have that skill set and toolbox. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the games and the way that you establish community in a room of people when you're doing this work and how you enter into it that allows for somewhat of a safety net for
Absolutely. Absolutely. non-actors. Raise your hand in this room if you are an actor. Raise your hand in this room if you are a non-actor. Oh, great, so the book covers everybody. So games for actors and non-actors. It is meant to be games that are going to demechanize the body, right? In Will Kilroy's physical theater class, we played Colombian Hypnosis, a game that was developed in Manizales, Colombia. And it's a physical act of oppression, but it's also a physical act of liberation. And the idea is to challenge your partner's body in ways that they may not have moved in a long time, but to awaken senses, right? And part of the idea of playing games is also when we allow ourselves to appear, in a sense, childlike, let down our guard, laugh, have fun, we can trust because we've allowed people to laugh at and with us, right? We can trust the people we're talking to about difficult conversations. We were talking about a game that I often play with, a game I often play with children of all ages. And so basically this is a game called Fox and Rabbit, okay? So everyone in the room sets up in pairs and you can be a partner here. So you set up rabbit holes. So you see someone running up, right? And open up. And someone's chasing me, they're the fox, I'm the rabbit, and I have to come here and I have to get into a rabbit hole. The second I get into this rabbit hole, now you have to run away because you're now the rabbit. Or you can change it so that they're the fox. And so there's this game of cat and mouse, right, going on. All you do is you say to the participants, now you have the right to close that hole. So now, come running. They'll find a different hole, right? Thank you. What does that bring up? We've just played a children's game. What's the metaphor? Access. Immigration. Internally displaced peoples. Refugees. And all of a sudden, you've just played a game, a children's game, and people are laughing, and then you sit down, what's that game about? And you have fourth graders talking about their social studies, civics, and humanities topics that their teacher has brought in an artist to do a workshop to unpack these things physically with games to then dig deeper into the curriculum. So it allows us a space in which we let go of a lot of our hang-ups about, you walk into a space and you're like, okay, today's topic, open up to chapter 4, we're going to talk about race. Go. Oh, you don't want to offend anybody? Oh, you're afraid you're going to say the wrong thing? Oh, but when you've just played like 15 minutes of games at the beginning of your 3-hour graduate seminar, and everyone's laughing and crying and rolling around on the floor, and all my students have to wear comfortable clothing. No one's allowed to wear heels, to my classes because we literally roll on the floor. But then we get into, so I have created a curriculum and written about the intersection of theater education and human rights education. This is a technique where we have human rights violations happening around the world, sort of unpacked by our cultural media, right? The journalism in all of our different countries, maybe they touch on it. Mostly they sweep it under the rug. But using theater games to unpack human rights violations, blows your mind.
Do you couple it with readings?
Oh, absolutely. Especially like this kind of stuff, you're bringing in resources and the data and bringing in, I had students come to newspaper theater workshops with the lyrics to songs. Yeah. Absolutely. And again, it also depends on, what age you're talking about. There are people who say to me, you cannot possibly do human rights education with kindergartners or first graders. I'm like, really? No, I'm not going to show them the play I directed on Las Mujeres de Juárez, but I am going to tell them no hitting, no spitting, no pushing, right? And we're going basically stood up and said, there is no research that shows that the arts allow students higher grades in school. And we're like, why did we ask you to come here? And he was like, the research isn't there, so it's up to all of you who are arts educators to go out there and do the research and document it, and start to do the studies in schools, and start to have the teachers, right, activated research in their own classes, doing the research that shows that when a young person comes out of a theater class and walks into a math class, that their heart is open. And they've been talking about stories of human beings from all around the world and all throughout history, and all of a sudden they're more open to the concepts of science and math and social studies and civics. And it also gives them the much needed, sometimes, physical activity that our country has taken out of the physical education system, which is a crime. Other questions? We have 4 minutes. We'd all gotten up and done some games, but I figured everyone's just kind of coming back from lunch and you don't really want, that kind of thing. I wish you'd all been there last night too, because wow, the exciting things that came out of that workshop. I feel like I learned more than anyone else. And yes.
I just want to share a project that our art association began. It's Save the Wildlife Art and Ecology Project, and it's tied to our Icons and Symbols of the Borderland exhibit that's traveling. But our means to connect with all ages and communities is through masks of the endangered species and native animals along the border. So the children choose a specific animal of their choice, and they create a mask. We also have masks when they arrive. We have an entire procession to go through the farmer's market or the public space where the museum is, and noisemakers with yucca sticks and music. So they are wearing a mask, and these are, the smallest child to the oldest adult, and they become an animal.
There
So
was
they're
someone from last
moving.
night's workshop, when we said poetry and, what was it that you said? Murals, right? Someone last night said mask work can be done as another technique. So it's so interesting that you bring that up. Wow.
Because it brings in the movement, and then we combined with a coalition down in the valley right now. It's at the Brownsville Museum of Art, and we combined with the coalition that included the Sierra Club and the Wildlife Refuge. So also with banners, and we went through the farmers market and then to the courthouse, and
Wow.
and it's just, math can be very powerful, but it's also a way of letting your physical being, connect with your own natural movement.
And that could be
well.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
Exactly. I want to thank you all for being such attentive listeners. You'll notice I positioned myself behind the timekeeper, so of course Alicia's like, she's not listening to me, what time it is, what time it is. But I am so excited to spend the rest of the day with all of you and the evening to really examine these ideas of how do we get beyond walls and borders. So thank you.
Thank you.